Hello, everyone. I'm Dara Bunjon. I'm the food enthusiast here at J. Moore Living. I'm a food writer, food stylist, publicist, and a very frustrated baker. Those of you joining the show live, just drop your questions into the comment box and I will check from time to time to see them. And our guest today is Lucy M. Long, Ph.D. She has been teaching ethnomusicology, I couldn't say that right, folklore and pop culture for over 30 years, primarily at Bowling Green State University, where she pioneered food and culture courses. She has founded a nonprofit center called the Center for Food and Culture. She has produced numerous documentaries, educational materials, articles, and various books such as Culinary Tourism, Regional American Food Culture, Ethnic American Food Today, and Food and Folklore Reader, and many other books. Welcome, Lucy. What's on your plate today other than the show?
Okay. Well, when you were asking me, how can we narrow this down? And I apologize for my voice too. I had COVID. I caught it in Ireland, and I'm still getting over it. So my voice is kind of weak still. Although, well, that was a month ago. I tested negative and everything, but so right now I'm actually working on 6 different projects. So I was checking my list. So I'm not sure where you want to start.
Well, I want to start with you. Okay.
Okay.
Where's hometown? What was it that inspired you to get involved with food? Why food? So where's hometown? Okay. Tell me a little bit how you evolved into your PhD and creating all this and the Center for Food and Culture.
Okay. I'll try to keep this kind of short. I was actually born in Charlotte, North Carolina. But really consider more Black Mountain and Asheville, North Carolina, to be my home. And that's because my father worked for the State Department, and we moved overseas when I was 9. So, I didn't really have a home in the U.S. I lived in South Korea for 9 years, Taiwan, Vietnam, Thailand, Pakistan. So, and then as an adult, I lived in Northern Ireland for a year, Ireland and Spain. So I've actually lived in Bowling Green, Ohio, Northwest Ohio. Let's see, since 1985. So longer than anywhere else. But the fact that I come from somewhere else makes me very aware of differences. And I know when I moved here, I would go to a restaurant, to the salad bar. Now, keep in mind, this is 1985. I go to a salad bar, and the salad bar was full of, mayonnaise and cheese cubes and peas, green Jello with, and then red Jello, and I'd been living on the East Coast, where there was a lot of fresh food available. I lived overseas, huge varieties. I lived in the South, where just this abundance of food and all. And I found it very, very strange. And, rather than saying, these people have no taste, this is awful food, I try to look into, well, why is this tasty for these people? What does it mean to them? So, a lot of that does go back to my own childhood and my own upbringing. So I like to say that I was bicultural as a child. My mother came from a very long established family in North Carolina, the Bradfords, as in Governor William Bradford. And growing up, I would go out to my grandfather's farm which I found out much later on had been a plantation deeded to them, by King George prior to the Revolution.
Really?
So very, very old. I also had no idea, until fairly recently, that the women who would come in and help with cooking and cleaning at our house, they were actually descendants of slaves of my ancestors. So, and then my grandfather, who had grown up on the farm, gave the deeds to the property, to the homes that they were living in. So he gave them those deeds, and so then they would come over and help out. I had no idea of any of that history, So that was kind of my DAR country club side of the family. Although my mother was an artist and a musician, and definitely not your standard country club person. So, and my father was from the Appalachian Mountain region of Western North Carolina. So, and his family had gone into Ashe County, the Boone area, with Daniel Boone, and so I had a long history there. But I was very, very aware early on. My country club cousins would make fun of my hillbilly cousins. And, I love the food of both, and the food is very similar, but there were some differences, and they make fun of each other, so that made me very, very aware. There are these cultural differences.
Right. Aren't you working on a current project about Appalachian food and reinventing the cuisine, apple stack cakes? I think you wrote fried green tomatoes. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, when I was growing up, no one ever talked about Appalachia as having a cuisine. Appalachia was where the war on poverty was happening, and that's what was being emphasized. So even people who had a positive image of the region, they still didn't think of it as having food that was worthy of talking about as cuisine. People talk about Appalachian food ways, folk ways, but it was never cuisine. It wasn't seen as anything that required skill or knowledge particularly. So that always really interested me, because I could definitely tell the difference between the hominy and country ham that my Aunt Ruby was making and the hominy and country ham I get over at Uncle Jim's house. So, it seemed to me that, that this food was just as tasty, but even more important, it was just as meaningful. It was tied to history, and it was tied to our identity and our values. So I was always very interested in how Appalachian food was being treated by outsiders. Now that relates also, I am a musician, and initially I did a master's in ethnomusicology, and kind of gave up on that, but I was actually looking at all of this stuff first with music, and food, because people didn't talk about food, but I started realizing, yeah, they're talking through food about all these ideas, who they are, how they feel about the stereotypes.
Right. You started in 1980s teaching, and then at that time there really weren't any studies. Food was not a course that was given, about the history of food, food ways, and things of that nature. And that evolved for you down at Bowling Green. You taught about food in the context of disciplines. And maybe can you explain to people what food ways means?
Sure. Well, and I should also clarify, no one that I knew of was studying food. And it wasn't seen as something that you would study except to be a nutritionist or a cook. And then when I was an undergraduate at Davidson College, I I was doing internships at the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian Institution. Actually, primarily because I initially dropped out of college, and I was staying with my parents who lived in Northern Virginia at that time. And when I was at the Smithsonian, I was introduced to the idea that food could be cultural. That you could talk about culture through food. That was at the Folklife Festival that the Smithsonian was putting on, and that was late 70s. So that introduced me to the idea. And then I actually, for my PhD, I was studying folklore, a lot of sociolinguistics, and then it was in the Department of Folklore and Folklife at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And there was one man there, Don Yoder, who actually did study food and included a lot of studies on food in his classes. And so, if you look at the history of foodways, the people who are actually studying and writing and theorizing about food and identity, food and community, food and power, most of them were students of Don Yoder at the University of Pennsylvania. There also were folklorists at UCLA, Michael Owen Jones and Robert Georges, for example. But there was a whole contingent of people who were studying food there, and that would have been the late 70s. And there was theorizing about it. So Don Yoder he's one of my personal heroes. So he was my professor, and he was the one who suggested that I start studying food. Because we were talking about different ideas, and I actually wrote my dissertation on music and tourism on the Appalachian dulcimer. But I was working with theories around or through food the whole time. Yes, yeah. I do want to give a shout out to those people, because those were my mentors.
Right. You started the Center for Food and Culture, and I'm just reading everyone because I can't memorize this. The mission was to promote an understanding of the power of food to connect individuals to past, places, and other people. And it has evolved. It is a .org. It is, how is it funded? Can people donate? I looked through the site, I didn't see that. Or you do grants to what's going on with that center? And just to tell people, there's so much to learn. Very simple. The website is up on the page. It's www.foodandculture.org. Back to the question.
Thanks. Now, well, and it started out as a publicly funded nonprofit, and I was getting grants and donations, and then the website got hacked into and was shut down. Actually, instead of photographs of vegetables, we had photographs of women in bikinis, things, and we were trying to keep up with all that and couldn't do it. So that was shut down. So we had to restart everything. And and part of the problem had been that with the donation button, somehow that let hackers in. So, so we ended up taking that off. And it is still a nonprofit. We have it as privately funded because that makes it easier for tax purposes. So people can always donate to it, by sending me checks. I should probably add a donation button on there again too.
Right. Well, they can reach out to you. There's so much that you're doing. In 2017, you wrote the book, Comfort Food, Meanings and Memories. Here comes COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
And it tells us you start getting involved in a virtual oral history of finding comfort, discomfort through foodways, and how COVID is affecting that. What is discomfort food as opposed to comfort food? I know it's probably a simple answer, but
well, and first I should mention that the book is co-edited with Michael Owen Jones, who is now a retired professor from UCLA and one of the major scholars in foodways. But the idea of discomfort food, there are two things. That some foods we think of as, oh, this gives us comfort, and then we use that as an excuse to eat it. So ice cream.
well, I know that.
Yes. Yeah. So the idea of comfort food, it's not just food that comforts, food that reminds us of nostalgic times, our childhood or whatever. It's a rhetorical strategy. It's a way that we use to justify eating things that we feel aren't really healthy for us. Okay, so so you have to think of it in that way. And then discomfort foods, would be foods that make us uncomfortable and all. But we also started seeing during the pandemic, there was such an emphasis on, find comfort through food. However, the reality was that a lot of people were finding just the opposite. It was stressful to try to get the ingredients that they needed to make their childhood favorite cookies, or they had some kind of allergy or a medical condition, so they needed to eat very specific things. So it was the idea that that without realizing it, everyone was talking about comfort as this real cheerful, easy thing to find, but a lot of people lacked access, or ability or skill, that was actually creating a lot of discomfort.
Okay. I just sort of wanted a little,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit more. And as for comfort food, yes, I find an excuse to eat all the bad things. Which brings me to a question, and there's probably not an answer to it, but in all your studies and everything that you've done worldwide and different cuisines and lifestyles, is there a universal comfort food or universal food that people go to?
People usually talk about childhood foods as being universal. The idea, of being universal, but it's also the idea of comfort food as an excuse to eat things that we think are not really healthy for us. That's a very American approach to food. Because we attach morality to all sorts of things. So you're, if you've been good, then then you can reward yourself by eating this bad food, or we say, oh, I was so bad, I ate 3 cookies, and that sense of morality doesn't exist in a lot of other cultures. So a lot of other cultures do, and let's say that very generally, they do talk about comfort food, but they usually mean foods from their childhood that remind them of being nurtured by someone else.
So food memories.
Yes. That's actually, I think, a much better way to put it. But even that can bring great discomfort. Not everyone had happy childhoods.
Right.
Not everyone wants to think about their relationship with their mother. So
it's 50-50. Let's see, we have something that's come in here. Let's see. Considering all the places you've lived and eaten, what have you found are your favorite, most enduring? Okay, this is not coming up. This is in a way. Most enduring, I guess, comfort foods.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
well, yeah, and that's, for me personally, and this goes back to my my Southern heritage, grits. So grits and scrambled eggs.
right.
that's definitely a comfort food. So, frequently people ask me, what's the most exotic thing that I've eaten? And in some ways I say the most exotic food I've ever had is in Bowling Green, Ohio, because it was just so different from what I was used to eating.
Well, you did in going to the Center for Food and Culture, you did a whole study on the foods of Ohio. There's a lot of
Mhm.
foods, and then there was one about Northern Ohio and the woods and sort of swamp area and what they're producing,
Mhm.
which brings me around to what's becoming hot these days, which is foraging.
Yes, yes, yes. Which is also something that we're also trying to warn people. That, a lot of plants are actually very poisonous. So foraging can backfire, but also if people are not sensitive to the ecosystem, if they're not familiar with that terrain, if they don't come from within that culture, and they're going in and foraging, it can do incredible damage. So we're seeing that happening with ramps.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, and West Virginia had kind of made a name for itself as being, the region that had ramps. It's this wild garlic, um, which also look a whole lot like lily of the valley, which are extremely poisonous.
That's right.
Yeah, so West Virginia has a ramp festival, and I remember going to a very high priced restaurant in Asheville, North Carolina, that was advertising Appalachian cuisine, and you could buy a plate of pickled ramps for $20. So they were being used for what a lot of people refer to as elevated cuisine. They take traditional foods and spiff them up a little bit, which is frequently delicious.
Right.
But, so and then now people have discovered there are ramps growing in lots of other places, throughout the Appalachian Mountain chain, which goes all the way up into Maine and into Canada. Um, I actually picked a bunch of ramps up here in Northwest Ohio 2 months ago, and and I froze some of those and use those along with garlic mustard, which is a wild invasive, well, it's an invasive species that's growing all over, and we made pesto with that. It was
Right.
yeah. It was delicious. So, but part of what started happening in West Virginia was so many people were going in foraging for ramps. They were trampling on all sorts of other plants, and going into areas that were not necessarily private, but had been used communally for a long time. And the outsiders were coming in, kind of disrupting things with the local people who had been, kind of taking care of the land for generations.
Land, right. Um, just remind people you can visit the site foodandculture.org. There are different things to be found on there. I start reading about, you know, we saw the upsurge of people raising chickens in urban settings.
Mm-hmm.
And there's really a lot that has to be considered when you start deciding to raise chickens. So if it's on your mind, definitely check the site. Let's see. One of the things, I was at the Fancy Food Show, and there is an upsurge of new plant-based foods.
Mm-hmm.
Have you looked into that? Is anybody talking about that there? What are your thoughts?
Mm-hmm. Well, my three children were all vegan vegetarians. My oldest was, he started being a vegetarian when he was about 4 years old. And we were reading a book about the cow. He said, "Oh, do I have to eat the hamburger?" I said, "No, you don't have to." And then we lived in Ireland, and ironically in Ireland, it was very acceptable. This was in the early 90s. was very acceptable to be vegetarian. And Burger King was making veggie burgers in Ireland then. So, so all of that was fine. And then we came back to the US and we went to a Cub Scout meeting and they were offering hot dogs, and he still had kind of a Northern Irish accent and said, "No, thank you, I don't eat meat." And the Cub Scout leader just went ballistic. He said, "Well, you can't be an American and not eat meat."
Really?
And so he ran into that kind of attitude a lot. Now we're in Northwest Ohio. This area has embraced industrial agriculture. It tends to be very conservative socially, politically. So
Right.
people tended to see being vegetarian as a political statement and something very, very radical. So it kind of pushed him into that. So all of that is to say that I've been very aware of vegan and vegetarian substitutes, for a long time. And I've always cooked a lot of, what we would call in the U.S. ethnic cuisines, a lot of Middle Eastern food, a lot of Central American, things that use a lot of beans,
Spices.
Beans and spices. Well, and frankly, the basic Appalachian food is beans and cornbread, and some collard greens. That's what I grew up eating. That's what my father would always make. So it wasn't difficult for us to be vegan and vegetarian. Being vegan was difficult. No eggs, no dairy, no milk, but the substitutes actually helped a lot with that. There's a lot of people are writing articles about that now, kind of the philosophy. What does it mean to have a meat substitute that looks and tastes exactly like meat? If you don't approve of meat, then why are you doing that? But yeah, I mean, it's, taste is so complex. We grow up with these tastes that make us feel like, oh, I finished a whole meal. I'm satisfied, and if you don't have those tastes, then you just kind of feel unfull the whole day.
Right. I don't know where it might have been the Daily Show or something, or Bruce. No, it was Bruce and Mark's podcast. And in France, they've set up a law that you can't say that it's a burger if it's vegan. You can't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think the burger's the only one that you can, but out of all of that, all those things, you can't say this is a shrimp substitute. You cannot use vegan shrimp or vegan blah, 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 vegan cheese in France.
Mm-hmm.
Just a footnote.
Yeah.
I could talk to you forever, and I plan to have you on the show again, and we can pick some other topics. So let me go to the ones that I ask everyone, and I prepared you, so don't play coy with me. You know the answers. Let's see. If you woke up tomorrow morning with a new talent, what would it be?
Oh, it would be to be able to sit down and get my thoughts out succinctly and articulately the very first time. So, yeah, I do a lot of writing, but it's very painful and it takes forever. It gets in the way of other things.
Well, I've dabbled in writing, and I agree with you. And that's why I just dabbled. And this is much easier. I can just ask away the questions. All right. If you could go back and give your 18-year-old self a piece of advice, what would it be?
I think it would be just go ahead and do the things that you're interested in. You have to be practical, but don't worry about what the rest of the world thinks. So, and I look back, I started writing about culinary tourism in the mid-1990s, and the topic was disapproved of by a lot of scholars in the humanities because they felt that tourism is inherently evil. And they felt, food is not significant enough to study.
Right.
And, and I fortunately, a woman, Barbara Crusher Black Gimblett, a very famous anthropologist, folklorist, she kept saying, "No, Lucy, this is interesting stuff. Let's go ahead and do this." So I published some articles, and then in 2004 put out a book, a collection of essays by people who were using that idea. And so it turns out I was the first person to use culinary tourism in print. But I didn't do more with it because
There were naysayers.
Yeah, and so and it's similar to other things like that I was interested in. Actually, the funniest one is I lived in Thailand and Vietnam for a year, and one of the things I loved doing in Thailand was going to the open air markets and eating.
Right.
And I would just eat my way through the market in Bangkok. And so when I came back to the U.S., I was in college, and what am I supposed to do with my life? And I mentioned to people, I'd love to do something, where you could have like market stalls all around, an eating area, so people could all eat together but choose different kinds of food. People thought that was absolutely absurd. It was ridiculous.
Look at it now.
And I was like, I should have copyrighted that somehow.
Well, that's what, Anthony Bourdain, may he rest in peace, was working on a project in New York, on the river. They were going to do a market. I don't know where that stalled, but it sort of faded out, I think, before he passed away. All right. So covered those. Since you do cook, what was your epic culinary fail?
I've actually had a lot of epic fails. So, because I'm very experimental, and I try to follow recipes, but I think it's just in my DNA. I can't follow them to the letter, and so something might be tasting just fine. I'll say, "Oh, I wonder what happens if you add this," and then it can be a disaster. So, yeah.
There's no one that sticks out in your mind. There have been multiple.
Well, one that I was very embarrassed about. I tried to make an asparagus boiled egg casserole that I remember my mother making every Easter, or just in spring in general. And it was all the like leftover hard boiled eggs from Easter and asparagus, and had a lot of cheese. It was a white sauce and breadcrumbs on top. So I actually found a recipe kind of for that, and put it together, and took it out to my son, who lives in Wisconsin, for an Easter or a spring dinner. And I hadn't tasted it before I got there, but I got out there and served, and it looked delicious.
You
But,
had the visual appeal. That's right.
and part of it, the asparagus, ended up being overcooked and kind of stringy, and it was awful. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I hear the story. Somebody used salt instead of sugar. I've talked about mine. Everybody,
Mhm.
it's can you turn it around, or do you just say let's order in pizza? And to wrap up, what didn't I ask you that I should have?
I guess I like to tell people what folklore as a discipline is, because usually we think of folklore. I mean, we being in the general public think of folklore as just like old traditions, old ways of doing things, But
Right.
as a folklorist, what I study is how individuals create meaningful connections between themselves and places, their past, and other people. And they do that in unofficial, informal ways. So to me, studying folklore, I mean, we're studying, this is the essence of life. How do we have a meaningful existence? And there are lots of official ways to do that. That's primarily what religion is.
Right.
But these are the informal, the unofficial things that we do. So it's not just having a meaningful job. It's also, the chatting with your coworkers. That's what makes it feel meaningful to you. So that's what folklore studies.
Oh, great. Well, I thank you. And as I said, Lucy, maybe 6 months down the road, if you have time, come back because you wrote a book on honey.
Yes.
And I'm a fan of honey, and I think I mentioned this in the last show. I was at the Fancy Food Show. And there is a honey that is produced by stingless bees that is sweet and sour at the same time.
Really?
Which was very unique. And I actually reached out to the honey board. They said, we can't talk to you because of the USDA. And I didn't understand that. And I just went, okay. So honey the next time, and maybe go a little bit more in depth on that. I thank you so much. I hope you feel better soon. Sorry, there's lasting effects, but you're still here, thank God. And until the next time, thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, everyone, just to let you know, July 11th through July 24th is Howard County Restaurant Week and craft beverages. So it isn't just restaurants, it is craft beverages that are doing specials in Howard County. The menus are diverse from gastropub to Korean barbecue, fine dining to casual. You can make your pick at the howardcounty.com, visit howardcounty.com, or simply type into Google Howard County Restaurant Week, and it'll take you directly to the restaurants and the menus that they are offering, and that is July 11th through July 24th. And happy Bastille Day today for all those celebrating. And let's talk about next week. Next week's guest will be Chef Todd Kalkstein of the Atrium Village Independent Living. And we're going to talk about food, feeding seniors, and the ins and outs of it. We all have seniors around, and especially if I come over to your house, you'll have a senior there. You need to know how to feed me. If you need to reach me at any time, you can reach me at my email, which is food@jmoreliving.com. My Instagram is @DaraCooks. All shows are immediately archived in video form on JMOR's Facebook page and jmoreliving.com. Feel free to dig into the past shows, take us for your walks, your runs. You don't have to watch, you can listen. If you're by the pool and you want to hear something interesting, just click on one of the past 100+ interviews that I have done. And, time and finances are tough at the moment all the way around. So I'd like to remind people, just be kind, put a smile on your face, say hello to people. Let's try to make it a pleasant day for everyone. So until next week, and as always, may your plates always, always remain full.